I think we all are struggling and striving to prevent this war, but I think that many of us know in our hearts that it is descending on us, that there is a wave that's about to break over our heads, and instead of giving up at that moment, we need to be prepared for diving into that wave and facing the next phase of the struggle. Because like in Vietnam, a lot of us realize that we're going to have to be preparing to move from the necessary step of public permitted protest to effective strategic civil resistance against this war. And we're telling people that we need to prepare instead of just standing in the road, standing in the street, blocking traffic. We need to be preparing ourselves to get in the way of this global war machine which is descending on the people of Iraq, descending on the people of the Middle East, descending on the people of the world. Because this is the computer age, the space age, the information age, and this war is going to be conducted. It's going to be planned, it's going to be targeted, it's going to be guided by a worldwide surveillance and targeting network that's based right here in Santa Barbara County. It's called the Aerospace Operations Center, and it's smack in the middle of Vandenberg Air Force Base. So that's what we're organizing for. A lot of people think of Vandenberg as a missile test site, but it's far, far more than that. Because the AOC, the Aerospace Operations Center at Vandenberg, is going to carry out the key surveillance, targeting, weapons guidance, and command operations of this war on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month, hour-to-hour basis as soon as this war is launched, and we can get in the way of it. Soldiers risk their lives for war. What are you? What am I? What are we willing to risk for peace?
Well, I'm joined in the studio now by full-time activist for peace, Sanderson Beck. He was at Vandenberg Air Force Base this weekend responding to a call for nonviolent direct action protests at the Vandenberg Air Force Base on the first Saturday after the war in Iraq opened up. And that did in fact occur. Wednesday night, the first bombings occurred and the invasion soon after. And Sanderson, what happened at Vandenberg?
Well, we had a vigil on Saturday afternoon led by Dennis, who had been arrested there about a week before for spraying his blood on the sign to show that, you know, the blood is spilled in a war. You know, people get distance from the war. And at Vandenberg Air Force Base, they are doing the computer targeting for the bombing and the missile guidance systems by via satellite. That's my understanding. And I'm doing everything I can to protest the war in nonviolent, loving ways, and I'm trying to organize in the community. And I felt that I wanted to be up there for that action. And so I went up, and after we did these silent poses, there was about 40, 50 people or more there, and Dennis led us in like to experience and to portray what's happening to the people in Iraq. Like if the bombs are dropping, like we put our hands over our heads and like try to protect ourselves from the bombing, and we'd hold that pose for about 5 or 6 minutes, and then he would give us another pose, like the children are crying, and we'd have our hands over our ears, or we would have our hands over our faces and our heads bowed in shame, or we'd be praying, or once we laid down like we were dead for the people that were being killed. And this went on for about an hour.
When you can't believe a word they say, and you're haunted by the swords they raise, like a rabid dog we've seen before. They refuse to hear the world pounding down their door. We don't want your war. Let's all yell a little louder now. We don't want your war. All stand together tall. We don't want your war. You keep telling us we do.
And it was really a beautiful experience because it was very meditative, it was silent, and there were no signs. He had asked people who had brought signs to if they were willing to give that up in order to do something different. And it was the first time, I've been to a lot of vigils and a lot of protests in my life, and that was a very beautiful experience.
for protecting me. Because I'm going to get hurt if I cross the green line.
I just want to say that I've decided to do civil disobedience here this afternoon, and I just would, first of all, I want to thank everyone for being here, and I just am absolutely convinced that this war is unjust and immoral, and my conscience impels me to take this public stand. And I just have been praying about this for months now, and I have decided that this is what I want to do here. But I also want to make a statement that just like our friends across the street, I also, like all of us, support the troops. And the best support that I can think of is to bring them home and to bring them home safely. And so I pray for them, and I pray for the lives of all, both American and Iraqi, that are being lost, have already been lost, and will continue to be lost in this conflict. And so I also feel that it's important that we be here because this base is a clearinghouse. It's a place where information is being disseminated and sent to the bombers and the missiles and helping them find their targets in Iraq. So for that reason, I've chosen to do this act of civil disobedience here. And so it is with great desire to be peaceful and nonviolent that I do this act. So thank you. Thank you, Mary Pat.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Pat.
back on the green line, And I'm going to advise you right now, that with you doing this, ma'am, I'm going to advise you right now, with you doing this, that you've already crossed the area of the green line. You understand, ma'am? Okay.
Presently on the United States military reservation at Vandenberg Air Force Base, California. Individuals with legitimate business on Vandenberg Air Force Base will not be permitted to enter or remain within the geographical confines of this installation. The installation commander has determined that the political or protest demonstrations placing within the boundaries of the Vandenberg Air Force Base interferes with the mission of the United States Air Force units against this base. By order of the commander, the Space Wing, the installation commander of Vandenberg Air Force Base, you are ordered effective immediately to leave Vandenberg Air Force Base. You'll have 2 minutes to leave the area and to depart Vandenberg Air Force Base by the most direct route. Your failure to depart Vandenberg Air Force Base after 2 minutes will place you in violation of the installation commander's lawful order to leave and will result in the permanent restrictions from this base. Once again, you are ordered to leave this area and now have 2 minutes to depart Vandenberg Air Force Base by the most direct route.
We will walk with you and sing your spirit home.
You now have 1 minute to leave this area and to depart Vandenberg Air Force Base by the most direct route. Your failure to depart after 1 minute will result in your permanent restriction from this base. You were previously advised that the installation commander of Vandenberg Air Force Base ordered you to leave this base. You were given a reasonable time to comply with this order to leave. By remaining on the base, you are now in violation of that order. Air Force Security Forces will now take you to the processing center, where you'll be given a letter from the installation commander formally and permanently restricting you from the confines of Vandenberg Air Force Base. After receiving the restriction letter, you'll be escorted off base by the U.S. Marshals. Please cooperate with the Air Force Security Forces as they escort
from the area and processing center in Vandenberg Air Force Base.
Looks like a pretty gentle arrest.
Yeah. So why do you feel compelled to do it today?
I've been waiting to do it. I mean, you know, this is what I'm committed to, is stopping the war, is making peace. And this is an opportunity. I came up here with this in mind of protesting. I think Vandenberg Action Base is, Air Force Base is violating international law and committing war crimes. And I'm here to point that out and to ask them to stop. So that's what I intend to do. Peacemakers not allowed. We're at war. Yeah. They don't allow peacemakers on the base when they're at war. But they don't allow them on the base anyway, because they're always at war. But they're really at war now because they're dropping the bombs and they're guiding them here.
Okay, if you want to watch, I'm gonna try to make these people aware that they are in violation of international law.
Courage, brother.
Sir, I would like permission to go on the base. This base is in violation of international law. You are complicit with war crimes. You are murdering the people of Iraq. Those are crimes against international law.
Sir, you need to step back
the
behind the line.
Nuremberg Principles,
Sir,
the
you
United Nations Charter, the Geneva Conventions. You people are war criminals.
You are present in the United States military reservation at Vandenberg Air Force Base, California.
By drowning out my voice, your megaphone system. What happened to free speech? Stop the war crimes. I would like to see the commander of
The installation commander has determined that any political
commander is a war criminal.
within the boundaries of the Vandenberg Air Force Base interferes with the mission of the United States.
God knows what you are doing. Your soul knows what you are doing. You will live here forever.
You are ordered effectively in the
You only carry your experience when you die. You take nothing else with you. What you have done,
by the most direct route.
in the murder of innocent people. You are responsible. Retire, quit your job. Do not participate in killing innocent people. The United States is becoming a fascist nation. We are aggressively attacking other nations. It is immoral. It is illegal. Everyone in the world is turning against the United States because the United States is becoming a war criminal. People need to rise up and non-violently protest. To lovingly put yourself between the war, to tell people not to commit these kinds of crimes. It's our responsibility. It is our nation that is killing people. Wake up. Wake up, America. We could lead the world to peace. I am running for President of the United States on a true disarmament platform. It is not disarmament to tell another country that is weaker than us, you cannot have any weapons of mass destruction, while we have more than anyone else in the entire world put together. It is hypocrisy. It is
You now have 1 minute to leave this area and depart Vandenberg Air Force Base by the most direct route. Your failure to depart after 1 minute will result in your permanent restriction from this base.
In this country, if you do not stop these wars, there will be a new American revolution. The people will take over and throw the fascists out. You are being warned. There will be a nonviolent revolution in this country. We will not allow you to murder people. Listen to your conscience. If you are Christians, follow what Jesus taught, what Jesus demonstrated. Love your enemies. Make peace. Resist not the evil. Because if you resist evil, you commit more evil. If you are violent against violence, you make more violence.
Given a reasonable time to comply with the order
Answer is not violence.
remaining on the base
Answer
is
is
now
knowledge.
violation of that lawful order.
Understanding.
Air Force Security Forces will now take you to the processing center, where you'll be given a letter from the installation commander.
We need disarmament in this country first, because we have more than any one of these evil weapons.
You'll be escorted off
Air Force
base by the
Base
U.S.
is
Marshal.
one of the biggest
We need to
criminals
cooperate
in
with Air Force
this
Security
country.
Forces as they escort you from this area to the processing center in
I was arrested
Vandenberg Air
here
Force
for
Base.
protesting the MX missile in 1983. The MX missile was the first strike weapon system. Stop the war! Stop the war! Stop the war! Stop the war! Make peace with loving nonviolent action. Stop the war! State is in wartime. Do a good job. Stop being a criminal. Stop killing the people of Iraq. Stop killing them.
So I was put in handcuffs and I was saying no war, no, or stop the war, right? Stop the war, and they walked me over outside the main gate, and there was a bus and the other two women that had been arrested before I were waiting on the bus, and I stood there while I guess they were searching me or something, and there was like a line of troops in riot gear or whatever. And so I spoke to them, and I looked in their eyes, and I said, explained that this is an illegal war. They do not have to obey illegal orders because of the Nuremberg principles, and I explained the Nuremberg principles, and I suggested that they could become conscientious objectors, because even people in the military can apply for conscientious objector. The motions were due a week before in writing, but I decided not to do any written motions. And but I wanted to respond to their motion, and the prosecutor, U.S. Assistant U.S. Attorney Sharon McCausland, she gave me a motion, turned in a motion to try to eliminate all my defenses, right? International law, she calls it, defense of necessity, even freedom of speech as a defense in this particular case, and she had her precedents that she cited and everything for that. And so I went to the law library, and Davina gave me some cases, and I was prepared. I didn't have time or really access to typewriters to make a written response, but I was, I think, very well prepared to do an oral response and to refute the precedents that she gave and to explain why my case is different. And basically, a lot of it was, some of it was, these were like nuclear weapons cases that similar to what I had done in the 80s, where people were protesting the Trident missiles or the MX missiles at military bases, and they were arrested for trespassing. And the courts had ruled, well, this, on the defense of necessity, that this is like a theoretical future harm, right? Because they're talking about the danger of nuclear war. Although I did actually, and they would discount it for that reason, but actually I believe, and I would argue, that it was actually illegal because of the Non-Proliferation Treaty and other treaties, so that those things were actually illegal at the time. But they didn't look at it in that way. But the point is, this case was different because it was an actual war that was happening. People were being killed. And if the war is illegal, then that's murder. Okay? So I felt that I had a good case in that sense that was different than those types of... And then I learned also there was a distinction between, which I hadn't known before legally. They make a distinction between direct civil disobedience and indirect civil disobedience. Direct civil disobedience is when you actually protesting the wrong law, that the law is wrong, so you disobey the law. Or you're actually trying to directly stop the actual wrong. And one example is the civil rights movement sitting in the lunch counters because it was the wrong, they weren't being served, so that's where they protested directly. Okay. Although I think it's a subtle thing because of the trespassing law. It's actually not actually the law they were saying was wrong. Another example of that is that I read in a case or in an article is that if there was some sort of toxic something in the water and some people wanted to thought that was wrong, it was a danger to the community, they might actually do something to stop the water, from getting to the people. Okay. Indirect civil disobedience is more of a symbolic action, or it's protesting someplace that's not exactly the wrong. So some examples for that are like if people go into an IRS office and they disrupt that or sit in or something, and they're complaining because the taxes go to pay for the war. Okay, so that's like indirect. Okay. Or like in this war, I think the good example to me is when the war broke out, a lot of people were really upset and they went roaming around the streets, and some people even blocked traffic. Okay? And so they really were protesting the war, but it was very indirect because they were actually just blocking average citizens who were driving around. They weren't, making the war, doing the war actively. But they were just trying to wake people up. So that was obviously indirect. The reason I went to Vandenberg is because I felt that was direct, because Vandenberg was directly participating in the war. And so I felt that was more focused, more purposeful, and therefore more legally justifiable. So then the judge let me testify in narrative form, and he did let me present evidence to back up the defense of necessity. Now, in defense of necessity, there's 4 elements that you have to prove. Now, basically, my argument was that the first time I went to Vandenberg, I didn't even have to argue defense of necessity because I was just there to ask them to stop committing crimes. And so that's a justification for being there. And to be guilty of trespassing, you have to be there for an unlawful purpose. Well, I felt just the opposite. I was there for a lawful purpose. I was there to ask them to obey the law, uphold the law. Not that I was trying to enforce them, make them. I was just appealing. I was just trying to, like report a crime and to go to the judge to report the crime. So the first time, I think I was justified. I didn't even have to argue defense of necessity. But then I was given a ban and bar letter. So when I went back the second time, that is trespassing without permission. So that then I had to argue that it was an emergency, that it was justified, and that's the defense of necessity. And there's 4 elements in the defense of necessity. The first is that there is a crime or a danger or a harm that is occurring, that is either occurring or imminent, about to occur. And so I argued, and I think it's rather obvious, that the war was occurring and that was it being illegal. Therefore, major crimes, mass murder, destruction of billions of dollars worth of property, and it was happening at the time, so it was even more than imminent. So I think that point was rather obvious. The second point is that the crime or the harm that you're attempting to stop has to be worse, more serious than what you did to violate a more minor law, in this case trespass. Okay, and so it's rather obvious that mass murder is worse than trespassing, stepping over a line. Okay, so that point is rather clear. The third point of the defense of necessity is that you tried every other alternative option to try to stop the crimes or prevent the harm or danger from occurring. And so in that I was able to present when I testified all the efforts that I would make to world peace in conjunction with other people, marching, vigils. I wrote books and published books. I put those into brochures, and was even running for president, like we could elect somebody different and try to educate people. And I was on radio, I was on TV, I wrote a letter to Kofi Annan, and I read a lot of that letter asking the United Nations to condemn the United States and prevent the war, you know, and trying to get the whole world, and the whole world did practically turn against the United States on this war and realized and said that it was an illegal war, and the UN did not justify it, the United Nations Security Council. So I talked about all those efforts. You know, I mean, our congressman had not even talked to people who wanted to come into his office to tell him that the war was wrong. He wouldn't even talk to them, and so on. And then the fourth point in the defense of necessity is that I had a reasonable belief that what I was doing could somehow prevent the harm or the crime or the danger from occurring. And so what I argued was that by asking them not to participate in the war, they could become conscientious objectors. And I heard somewhere that there was more than 100 conscientious objectors in the military during the war who applied for it. And I wanted to find out if, but they never let me ask any of the Air Force personnel, if any at Vandenberg had actually applied for conscientious objector. And also, I don't think you have to prove it's not reasonable that, like the prosecuting attorney was trying to say, well, I could never stop the war by myself. I don't think I'd have to prove that I could stop the war by myself. The idea is that myself with other people, or by telling other people, with their cooperation, the war could have been stopped or even modified. And I think there's actually good evidence that because we had such a big peace movement this time, as compared to 1991, a lot less civilians were killed, because the government knew the more they killed, the worse it would be for them politically. And I think the fact that so many millions of people were marching against this war made them made them take even extra effort not to kill as many people as they had before in 1991, and when they killed about 175,000 Iraqis. So those are the four elements of necessity, and so I was able to testify about what I did.
You keep telling us we do. Trying to turn us into lemmings with their magic on TV. Leaking military secrets is one of their specialties. Two reporters hanging on their words like schoolgirls in love. They've got the scoop, but we're no closer to the truth. If we raise our flag on a million graves, will we all be proud, or will we be ashamed of our leadership, greedy and arrogant, and we'll all be judged by the choices that we made.